You open the gov.uk benefits calculator. You fill in your details, your address, your age, whether you rent or own. A few clicks later, the screen tells you that you could be entitled to pension credit. Housing benefit, a council tax reduction. The number adds up to several £100s a month. You sit back and breathe. For a moment, it feels like the system might actually work in your favour for once. But the calculator can only work with what you put into it. If you miss the ISA you've been quietly topping up for the past decade, or the small private pension you built up from a few jobs in your 40s, the answer on the screen can look far more generous than the answer you get when DWP checks the full picture. The trouble is, that answer may be completely wrong for your situation. I've seen this happen more times than I can count. Someone does the sensible thing, they use the official tools, they check what they're entitled to, and they walk away with a number in their head that doesn't hold up once they actually apply. Not because they were reckless, because these calculators are built around a simple model, and real financial lives are rarely simple. I've done the same thing myself. A few years back, I plugged in some numbers and came away thinking the benefit system was far more generous than I'd realized. It wasn't until I read through the actual DWP guidance that I understood what I'd missed. The calculators show you the best-case picture. They don't always show you what happens when you've been responsible with your money. If you've spent your working life putting a little aside, a bit in savings, a modest pension pot, the system doesn't always reward that. Sometimes it penalises it. That's what this video is about. Not to frighten you and not to tell you the system is hopeless. But if you're between 55 and 65, and you've got somewhere between £10,000 and £50,000 put away, there's a specific mechanism in the benefit rules that almost nobody warns you about, and understanding it could save you from making decisions now that cost you significantly later. If that sounds worth knowing, stick around. And if this kind of thing is useful to you, subscribing to the channel means you won't miss the next time we go through something the system doesn't make obvious. Let's start with the actual numbers, because most people don't know them precisely. The full new state pension in the 2026 to 2027 tax year is £241.30 a week. That works out to roughly £1,046 a month, about £12,548 a year. Now, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation publishes a minimum income standard every year. The amount researchers calculate a single person in the UK actually needs for a modest but acceptable standard of living. That figure has consistently sat well above what the state pension pays, and that calculation doesn't include rent. If you're a homeowner with no mortgage, £997 a month is tight but workable. If you're renting, even in a cheaper part of the country, you're looking at a significant gap between what the state pension pays and what it actually costs to keep a roof over your head and the heating on through winter. This isn't a failure of personal budgeting. The state pension was never designed to cover everything. It was designed as a foundation, something to build on, not something to live off entirely. The DWP knows this, which is why pension credit exists. Pension credit tops up your income to a guaranteed minimum. For a single person, in the 2026 to 2027 tax year, that standard minimum sits at £238 a week. So if your state pension and any other counted income falls below that, guarantee credit can bridge the gap, and it does more than just top up your income. Once you're receiving pension credit, you may unlock a cascade of other support. Housing benefit if you rent, council tax reduction depending on your local council's scheme, help with NHS dental treatment and other health costs if you get guarantee credit, and the warm home discount. For someone with no savings and no private pension, that full package of support can be worth well over £3,000 a year on top of the state pension itself. If you're looking at that figure and wondering how anyone manages on the state pension alone without it, that's exactly the right question to be asking. The system was built with that support in mind. The problem is, that support comes with conditions. And those conditions are where things get complicated, particularly if you've spent years doing what most financial advice told you to do. Meet Sarah. She's reached state pension age. She spent most of her working life as a nurse. Long shifts, modest pay, the kind of job where you don't get rich, but you learn to be careful with what you have. Over the years, she put money aside. Not a lot. £25,000 in total, spread between some premium bonds and a cash ISA. No grand plan, just the habit of saving a little each month, because she'd always been told that was the sensible thing to do. She thinks of it as her cushion, the money she won't touch unless something goes wrong. When she sits down to sort out her finances ahead of retirement, she runs the numbers and assumes she'll qualify for pension credit. She has no private pension, her state pension doesn't cover her full outgoings, and by every visible measure she needs the support. What she doesn't know is that her £25,000 has already changed the calculation. Completely. Here's how the DWP sees it. Pension credit has a savings disregard limit of £10,000. Below that, your savings are ignored entirely. Above it, the DWP applies something called Tariff Income, a rule that converts your savings into a phantom income that gets deducted from your benefit. The maths is straightforward, and it's worth going through once so you can see exactly what it does. Sarah has £25,000 saved. The first £10,000 is ignored. That leaves £15,000 above the threshold. For every £500 of that excess, DWP treats her as if she earns £1 a week in income, whether she actually earns it or not. £15,000 divided by £500 is 30. So Sarah is treated as having £30 a week in phantom income. That's around £120 a month, deducted directly from her pension credit entitlement. She hasn't earned that £120. She hasn't withdrawn it. It's sitting in a premium bonds account untouched. But in the DWP's model, it exists, and it costs her, and it doesn't stop there. Because that phantom income also nudges her closer to the threshold where council tax support starts to reduce. Depending on her local council's specific scheme, she may lose partial or full council tax reduction as well. She saved responsibly for 30 years, and the system is now treating that saving as a liability. I've seen people hold up their ISA statements with genuine pride, and rightly so. It took discipline to build that. But DWP doesn't see discipline. It sees a number above £10,000 and it applies the rule. That feeling of having done everything right and still being penalised is something we're going to come back to, because it's more common than most people realise, and it tends to stop people from taking action when they still have time to do something about it. But there's a second trap, and in some ways it's sharper than this one. If Sarah also had a small private pension, even £200 or £300 a month, the way the system handles that is different again, and the outcome, for someone like her, is genuinely difficult to look at. Let's stay with Sarah for a moment. But now let's add one more detail. Suppose she didn't just save £25,000. Suppose she also has a small private pension from a workplace scheme she was enrolled in during her 50s. It pays her £200 a month. Not a lot. But she worked for it, and she expected it to help. Now let's look at her neighbour, Martin. Martin is the same age. He rented his whole life, never quite managed to save anything, and has no private pension at all. Just his state pension, the same as Sarah. On paper, Sarah looks like she's in a stronger position. She has savings. She has a private pension. She made better financial decisions by almost any measure. Here's what actually happens. Martin applies for pension credit. He qualifies for guarantee credit. He receives the top-up that brings his income to the guaranteed minimum. That can also passport him to major extra support, housing benefit if he rents, council tax reduction under his local council's rules, help with NHS dental costs, and the warm home discount if he meets the scheme conditions. Sarah applies. And because she has that £200 a month private pension, the DWP deducts £200 a month directly from her pension credit, pound for pound. Every penny of private income she receives reduces her state support by exactly the same amount. That's a 100% marginal deduction rate, not 20%, the way income tax works at the basic rate. not even 50%. A full pound taken from her benefit for every pound she earned through her own pension. The result in cash terms is that Sarah ends up with roughly the same monthly income as Martin. Except Martin's council tax is covered, Martin's rent support is intact, Martin's NHS costs are handled. Sarah, because her combined income and savings put her just above the thresholds, is covering those costs herself. In some real-world cases, once rent, council tax and passported help are added in, she can feel no better off, and sometimes worse off, than the person next door who saved nothing. That is not a hypothetical. That is the structure of the system as it stands in 2026. It's worth sitting with that for a moment, because it runs completely against the logic most of us were raised with. Save for your retirement. Build up a pension. Don't rely entirely on the state. That advice isn't wrong, exactly. But it was never accompanied by a clear explanation of what happens at the margins, the zone where you have a little, but not enough for it to actually improve your position. Martin didn't plan his way into a better outcome. He just never had the savings to fall into the trap. Sarah did everything she was told to do, and the system penalises her for it. That's the crudest version of the paradox, and it's why so many people in their late 50s, when they finally sit down and look at how all of this fits together, come away feeling not just confused but genuinely angry. That anger is the next thing worth talking about. I've read through more comments on this channel than I can easily count, and if I had to name the emotion that comes up most consistently, not the most dramatic, but the most frequent, it isn't despair, it isn't confusion, it's anger. A specific kind of anger, the kind that comes from feeling like you followed the rules, did what was expected of you, and then discovered the rules weren't actually designed with you in mind. People write in and describe 40 years of paying NI contributions, decades of getting up early, taking the reliable job over the interesting one, skipping holidays to keep the savings account moving in the right direction. And then they sit down with a benefits calculator, or they finally read through what DWP actually counts as income, and they realize the system treats their discipline as a disqualifier. That feeling has a name. It's not just frustration. It's the particular sting of believing you were being responsible, and finding out that responsibility put you in a worse position than if you hadn't bothered. I understand it completely, and I want to say clearly, that reaction is not self-pity. It is a completely rational response to an incentive structure that genuinely does produce unfair outcomes for people in the middle. People who saved a modest amount, built a small pension, and ended up in the gap between qualifying for full support and having enough to not need it. The system wasn't designed maliciously, but it was designed around simple categories. You either have very little and qualify fully, or you have enough to be comfortable. The people it handles badly are the ones who did a reasonable job but not an exceptional one, and in the UK, that's a very large number of people approaching retirement right now. Here's where I want to be honest with you, though. Staying in that anger, understandable as it is, tends to delay the one thing that actually helps, understanding exactly where you stand and what's still within your control. The rules are what they are, and within those rules, there are legitimate steps that can change the outcome significantly. Not by gaming anything, but by understanding the boundaries well enough to make sensible decisions before they're made for you. If you recognize yourself in Sarah's story, or Martin's, or somewhere in between, leave a comment. Tell me where you're at. You'll find you're not the only one, not by a long stretch. And sometimes just knowing that other people are navigating the same thing makes it easier to think clearly about the next step. Which is what we're going to look at now. So let's go back to Sarah. She has £25,000 in savings and a small private pension. She now understands exactly how the tariff income rule and the pound-for-pound deduction are affecting her entitlements. The question is, what can she actually do about it? The first thing to understand is that spending down savings before applying for benefits is not automatically considered cheating. DWP has a specific rule called deprivation of capital, and it does prohibit certain things, but it also explicitly permits others. The distinction matters enormously. What is permitted? Paying off debt. If Sarah has a credit card balance, a remaining mortgage, or any other personal debt, she can use her savings to clear it. DWP's own guidance recognizes debt repayment as a legitimate use of capital. Her savings drop. Her tariff income calculation improves. Her pension credit entitlement recovers. And she's also no longer carrying debt into retirement, which is a reasonable outcome in its own right. What is also permitted? Essential home improvements. A new boiler, roof repairs, replacing a heating system that's failing. These are classed as reasonable expenditure, spending that maintains the basic habitability and safety of your home. If Sarah uses £8,000 to replace an aging boiler and sort the roof before she retires, that £8,000 is gone from the savings calculation. It's been converted from cash into something tangible and necessary. Spending like this can reduce the tariff income calculation. If legitimate spending brings her total savings below £10,000, the deemed income rule no longer applies. If it only brings her down part of the way, the tariff income reduces, but it does not disappear. Now, here is where the boundary sits, and it's important to be clear about this. What is not permitted? Giving money away to reduce the number on paper. If Sarah transfers £15,000 to her adult children in the months before applying for pension credit, DWP will treat that money as notional capital, meaning they will act as if she still has it and apply the tariff income rule anyway. The gift doesn't reduce her liability in their eyes, it just removes her access to the money while leaving the penalty intact. The line DWP draws is between spending that genuinely improves your life or reduces your obligations, and transfers designed primarily to bring a number below a threshold. The first is legal and recognized. The second is likely to backfire. Understanding that boundary and acting on the right side of it, ideally before retirement rather than after, is the practical difference between being caught in the trap and stepping around it. It won't feel like a complete solution. For many people in Sarah's position, the system will still feel unfair, because in several respects it is. But working within the rules that exist, rather than the rules you wish existed, is the only version of this that actually changes the outcome. Living on the state pension in the UK in 2026 isn't simply a matter of budgeting carefully. It's a matter of understanding two specific mechanisms, tariff income and the pound-for-pound deduction on private pension income, that the benefit system applies quietly, without much fanfare, to people who did exactly what they were supposed to do. The benefits calculators can show you this only if every detail is entered correctly. Savings, ISAs, pensions, rent, council tax and household circumstances. Miss one piece, and the picture can change completely. The standard advice won't always flag it, and by the time most people discover it, they've already made the decisions that are hardest to unpick. What I hope you're taking away from this video is straightforward. If you're approaching retirement with modest savings or a small private pension, you are in the zone where these rules matter most. Not because you're wealthy, because you're in the middle. And the middle is precisely where the system is least forgiving. You are entitled to understand the rules. You are entitled to make legal decisions about how you manage your finances in light of them. There is nothing dishonest about paying off debt, maintaining your home, or making sensible financial decisions before you retire. That is not gaming the system. That is using the system as it was designed to be used. Don't feel guilty for looking closely at this. Anyone else in your position would do the same. And the ones who come out better are usually the ones who looked early enough to do something about it. If this video was useful, please share it with someone you know who's in their late 50s or early 60s. The savings trap catches people precisely because nobody warned them in time. You can be the person who changes that for someone else. And if you haven't subscribed yet, it would mean a lot. This channel exists to go through exactly this kind of thing. The parts of the financial system that are technically public knowledge, but practically invisible until it's too late.